Hey everyone. All right, so let's kick it off. This is the second meeting of 2021 for the Windy City Digital Project Managers Meetup Group. Today's meetup discussion is risk doesn't need to be a four-letter word. We're going to be looking at risk management and problem solving in project management, product management, talk about some challenges with risk management and some advice and solutions on how to overcome that. So a little bit of an introduction for anyone where if it's your first time at one of our meetups. Windy City Digital Project Managers is a meetup group. It's been around on and off since 2015. And we decided that we're going to kick it off again, try some new things. So we have a lot of cool meetups coming up being planned. We'll have one in March, and then we'll have them throughout the rest of the year. Some of them will be discussions. Some of them we're going to be aiming to have more hands-on workshops. So if you are interested in learning more about digital product management, project management, meeting some other people in the network, then I encourage you to stop on into one of our discussions. So for this one, oh, and really quick, so this is being hosted by 8-Bit Studios, should probably mention that. And we are a UX design and tech studio right here in the Windy City. We work with everyone from startups to enterprises to apply our principles of research, usability, design, and technology to build apps that create positive change. I'm Aaron Senster. I'm a project manager at 8-Bit Studios, and moderating this panel is Emily. She's another project manager at 8-Bit Studios. And we've got 4 awesome speakers today. With us is Amanda Harasti. She has been in all things digital for 15 plus years. She started out as a front-end web developer and made the transition to project management early on in her career. Most of her time has been spent in higher education and pharmaceutical marketing, with a short time on the traditional advertising side as well. She is currently a group program director at Intouch Solutions. And in her free time, Amanda loves to cook and volunteers at the local animal shelter. Also with us is Gina Sanji. She's a technical product manager at Daily Harvest, overseeing a team managing the backend services and infrastructure. She has a robust background in project and program management from her previous roles at Rally Health as a consultant. And in her spare time, she volunteers at the local animal hospital as well and runs a small leather crafting business. We've also got Tony Costello. Tony manages a team of 10 for Change Healthcare and their retrospective chart review business unit. Tony's team focuses on process improvement and new initiative implementations. He's been with the CHC for the last 5 years, and prior to that, he did a full career with the US Army and retired in 2016. He's been a part of a volunteer program to teach veterans project management for the last 4 years. Specifically, he teaches risk management and tries to link the experiences veterans have while in the military with the civilian world. And finally, we have Len Marchese. He's the CEO and president of Kenechi, a nonprofit that helps at-risk underserved youth and young adults achieve a more purposeful life. He is also the founder of Rethink, which helps organizations solve the right problems with solutions that matter. Len is also a PMI certified project management professional, a member of the PMI Chicagoland chapter, and currently their director of social outreach. So I think we're going to have an awesome discussion. If you are watching this and you're in the chat, feel free to put in any chat questions you have for our speakers. At the end of the discussion, we'll throw in some audience questions as well. But with that, I will go ahead and kick it off to Emily.
Thank you, Aaron. As Heather has noted, we have a guest over here. This is Charlotte, and immediately she's gone. Great, thanks so much. Awesome, but this is not about me or my cats. This is about our 4 awesome panelists and their wonderful experience and what we can learn from them. So first, we're going to kick things off and not talk about risk management at all, but instead, let's get to know you guys just a little bit. Tony, let's start with you. What is your favorite cold weather activity? I will take current pandemic times or in the before time. That goes for all of you. You can reference Either one.
So with my Army background, and I mentioned before we kind of kicked off the whole thing that I'm also involved with my son's Boy Scout troop. Camping, believe it or not, camping in this cold weather is something I love doing. Figuring out how to cook a meal or just heat it up a little bit if you pre-make it is one of the most enjoyable things, because you can have so much fun out in the snow. We'll do it with like in combination with a ski trip. We'll do it where we're going to do cross-country skiing instead. So lots of incredible things to be able to do in the snow just because it's a little cold. I can put on enough layers. Originally being from Atlanta, this was not how I grew up. So it is definitely awesome to be able to really experience snow, because I didn't growing up. So
Wow.
Camping, I like to be able to camp out in the snow.
That is awesome and very impressive. Amanda, let's go to you. Favorite cold weather activity?
Yeah, my favorite cold weather activity is to get out of it. So I do not like cold weather, but given the pandemic situation that we're in, it's given me the opportunity to catch up on what I'm sure many of us are doing, binge watching TV shows. I have a little bit of an addiction to true crime. So you kind of watch one and then it goes into the other and you just can't stop. And before you know it, the afternoon is done. But yes, my hat's off to you, Tony. I would never go camping in the cold.
Amanda, most recent true crime that you binged via streaming?
Actually, the Lacey Peterson trial. It's a couple of years old from A&E that aired.
Okay.
So just kind of catching up on that and watching that, and like just kind of, I was a lot younger, so kind of understanding the details and stuff. So that was the latest one I could recommend. It's
Awesome.
on Hulu.
Hulu, thank you very much. Len, you're up.
All right, my favorite pre-pandemic is snowmobiling in Yellowstone. When I was living in the Northeast, I used to be part of the New England Snowmobile Club, and we would charter a flight and go out there every year for a week. And it was just the most incredible experience. I've never seen Yellowstone without snow. Now, during pandemic, it's scotch and shortbread. While I watch Life Below Zero, which has, Tony, if you like camping in the cold, you got to watch that show, because these people are ridiculously committed to being in cold weather of minus 30 and minus 50.
Amazing. Amazing. Are you making the shortbread yourself?
No. Actually, Whole Foods has a good shortbread, and then there's that always the ones that come from Scotland that are pretty good too.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, Gina, take us home.
All right. I would say in the before time when I was younger, I really enjoyed snowboarding. I grew up in northern Michigan, so we had some pretty large hills, which were, good to snowboard down. But now in pandemic life, I've taken up latch hooking. I've fully embraced like granny vibes. I've currently got a like Marilyn Monroe, Andy Warhol latch hook rug pillow cover thing that I'm like halfway done, and I started a rainbow one too. So I don't know, I'm embracing that hook in life. So
I love that. Is that, I know nothing about that.
Yeah.
Is that, do you start with a pattern or are you free forming?
Oh yeah, I like bought a kit on Amazon because I didn't feel that invested in this hobby. So like just to give it a try.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I feel like I know all of you a little bit better now. So let's dive into the meat of it all, talking about risk, talking about the problems that arise and how the heck we manage them. So this question's for everybody. So I'll kind of pick on you each one, but I would love for each of you to tell us all about your current industry and the types of risk that you and your teams are typically handling. That will give us, I think, a lens for the rest of our conversation. Amanda, let's start with you.
Sure. So I work in pharmaceutical advertising, and so that comes with a lot of red tape, a lot of regulation, a lot of reviews before anything can ever see the light of day to the general public. And so when we have an error on a website, it's not just an error that you can fix and like maybe it's a typo or something like that, right? Sometimes if you have an error in like safety information or dosing information, that is a serious problem. So not only is it the risk of having something incorrect on the site, but also depending on the severity of the error, you could be at risk of having your clients get a letter from the FDA, which nobody wants to have. And so there's a tremendous amount of scrutiny on quality and making sure everything is correct, making sure we're checking everything, making sure everything functions as expected when it goes out there, because when it doesn't, we hear about it and we have to explain, we have to go do a whole like, what's the word I'm looking for? A root cause analysis of how did it happen and all of that. And then again, being in the digital world, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, when you're working with websites and things like that, you can't always do things in a waterfall fashion. That build A, build B, build C. Sometimes you're doing A, B, and C at the same time. And so that naturally creates risk right there when you have to marry that branched code back together. So throw all that together in a pot, and that's things that we deal with every single day.
All right, thank you for that. That sounds like a lot of fun. Len, let's go to you. Tell us about your industry and the types of risk that you're typically up against.
Well, I would say that since I might be the only guy on the planet or in the United States with a patent for problem solving, that's where the focus is. So it's on how to get clients unstuck, ensure they're solving the right problem and a problem that, a solution that's going to matter. So we apply that method, but it makes no difference how good a method is if you're solving the wrong problem. So that becomes the sticky point with interacting with the clients, because you have to look at that. They usually tend to look at the present by looking at the past, and they make the same mistakes. They like to jump to the solution before they know everything about the problem. They're not dealing with facts and applying common sense as to reading what the data means and how to properly interpret it and what it implies. And from a project management standpoint, they're great on focusing on the project, but they're not as tuned in to post-project. Not only the implementation, but the integration, especially goes out to the marketplace. How's it going to be received? How's it going to be sustained? How is it going to be measured in its benefit and relevance? So all of that usually starts off with false assumptions. So I find that trying to find risk is, if you can look where all the assumptions are, that's where a lot of risks are going to come out down the road.
Yeah, absolutely, Len. Thanks so much. Gina, let's go to you. Tell us about your industry.
Yeah. So I actually recently joined my company in November. So the industry is food. We make frozen food products that are shipped to people's doors. So the types of risk that I deal specifically with my team is mostly around supply chain logistics and facility management. So I'm constantly assessing if a backend change will have any downstream impact to like automated communications, or if we're trying to change a day that we bill people, if that might totally muck up all of our supply chain logistics by overwhelming them with orders on a given day or time. Before that, I was at a health insurance company. I made the prescription finding software for United Health Group. So I have a pretty robust background in that, similar to Amanda, where it's like you're working with very heavily regulated government bodies. And like, if you're dealing with Medicare and Medicaid, like you have to like be very attuned to risk and red tape. So I've been bringing a lot of that awareness into my current role, which I think has helped a lot.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we will learn more about what you've brought over further along in our discussion. Tony, tell us about your current industry and the types of risk.
Yeah, hey, so this is great that I get to go last because I had the benefit of hearing everybody's. It's funny. So I'm on a healthcare IT company, Change Healthcare. And the primary function of our business unit, our particular one in Illinois, is focused on hospital audits. So we take in, our clients are United Healthcare, Aetna, Cigna, some of the larger insurance companies. We take their claims from hospitals around the country and conduct audits on them, whether the DRG code, medical necessity, and high cost drugs is one of the categories that we look at as well. So Amanda, when you mentioned some of the risks that you have associated with pharmacy audits, we're looking at what was overcharged. Did they put down 100 pills instead of 10? So those are the kind of things we're looking at. To kind of boil it down to our specific business unit, we are responsible for a lot of the outbound letters that end up going to all the hospitals, and they announce what documentation we need. So the risk inherent with that, sending thousands of letters to thousands of hospitals around the country, you're bound to have a PHI violation from time to time. And so the risk of sending a PHI violation, sending the wrong patient information to a hospital is absolutely the top of our list. So as we do new implementations, work on projects, that's foremost in our mind. And Len, you mentioned wrestling with implementation. One of the things that not only is a part of what our project teams are doing to just get the project in place, but you're right about the implementation, not having a robust implementation process or a operational phase afterwards. It's really ensuring that that team you're handing it off to is absolutely comfortable. And we've tried whatever we could do to try to get a solid process in place before we go, here it is, it's yours now. So it's kind of good to hear you saying that, Len.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. We're going to stick with you. I have it on good record here that you might have a story that you could share with us about a time that a risk actually came to fruition. So something perhaps that your team thought might happen and it actually happened. So tell us about that. Tell us what happened and how you were able to mitigate it or not.
So this one I got to turn the Wayback Machine on, back to 2004. So this was in my Army days. In the days of 2003 and 4, the Iraq War was just barely kicking off. And I had been in the Army for about 5 years at that point. I had just PCSed to Germany and was kind of integrating in with my unit. We had this paradigm that what's going to happen if we don't train up the unit the right way and we just send them to combat, because we had newer units. The unit that I was a part of was a brigade element, so roughly 1,500 soldiers underneath this, and there were 3 battalions under them, roughly 500 per, again, rough. So one of these units was slated to leave in early January of 2005, so we had all of 2004 to prep them. So obviously, there's a lot of risk associated with sending a unit who had never been to Iraq downrange without a lot of the proper training. So of course, trying to make sure that we had them trained up and prepped when we hadn't really done this. And again, I was in an engineer unit, so the risks are not quite as bad as a frontline infantry unit or somebody that would be definitely on the front lines engaging the enemy, that kind of thing. We were building things. Our main mission was to do construction while we were over there. So very risky operation, but there was no training plan. There was no guidance from the Army that here's what an engineer unit should do before they go. So in order to mitigate the risks associated with sending that unit to Iraq, we had to develop our own training plan out of this. And there were several different pieces of this. Now I'll admit, being relatively junior in my career, I had a small chunk of it. So the unit that was going, we wanted to make sure that they could drive from point A to point B. And what would happen if they were to get shot at, if they had a roadside bomb go off, if they had some sort of something else bad happens to them. So you go through this entire list of your risk register, essentially, of what could happen, doing your meta language, what could happen if this, then this. And kind of work your way through. So we ended up developing a convoy live fire training program for this unit that they were able to go through over the course of about 2 weeks, where they got their entire unit cycled all the way through. Every soldier had a chance to shoot their own weapon out of a vehicle at a target while the vehicles were moving. So 4 or 5 vehicles at once firing a target. It's funny, you don't think about all this training prior to going. You're just like, the soldiers just go, they just go. But there's a lot more that went into it. And that was kind of a peek behind the curtain of what needed to be done. That ended up becoming a repetition that we were able to do over and over with multiple units after that. So risk associated with the Army. And I'll tell you, repetition has been kind of one of the things that has really saved the military, doing it over and over, training. So that's what I would say, what have I experienced?
Thank you so much for sharing, Tony. That was a really insightful story. I really appreciate that. Let's shift gears just a little bit, but similarly, Len, can you tell us about a time that you had an unexpected risk come up? So something maybe you and the team hadn't planned for, but it arose. How did you solve that? How was that different from maybe a risk you had planned for? Like Tony's example, they trained for those, situations.
I have a couple I could share. One is first with a client. We were helping the Chicago Department of Public Health implement Cerner in their clinics. And when it came time to go live, and prior to that, the readiness assessment, and you go ahead and you get everyone in and you do the training concurrent with that. We were unpleasantly surprised to find out that a lot of the folks that were working in, patient registration and scheduling knew their process because it was so rote. They were taught what to do. It was pretty simple and they just did it. Now the complexity of working with the computer and using the Cerner software, we get them into the training class and we found out how many of them they were illiterate. They couldn't read some of the instructions. They didn't understand some of the things, especially, what was going on with the screens and how you had to interact. That was the big surprise. And then once everything was implemented, found out that, they pulled the old process out of the bottom drawer because that's what they knew. And they weren't using the new system. They would just use the old system and then maybe go back, or somebody would help them out and they'd enter the data into Cerner. So that was an unexpected risk that had to be dealt with. And, it gets more costly when you find these things further towards the end. On a personal note, back in, I say around the 2001 timeframe, I had filed a patent for the problem solving method, and my partner and I decided, let's make an app. And it was at the big boom of the internet and so forth, and you can go get money, and it was all exciting. And when you're all excited about that, you don't think anything's going to go wrong, right? So after all of these pitches, we finally got some funding, and timing wasn't good. It was at the tail end of that big boom. I'm putting on my tie. It's my birthday to go get another check. And the phone rings and the internet bubble had burst. And they said, guess what? We're not writing any more checks, so don't bother coming today. Well, we had this burn rate and lots of bills, but no more money now. And that was the end of my Northeast venture, my Northeast existence. And in 2004, that's what brought me to Chicago and start building up a new business here. So that was, that was something I didn't see. Everything was so energized, and you just thought, there's no end to this money glut. And we were ahead technology wise. You couldn't Zoom like this. I mean, people talking and the video was so out of alignment. It was crazy. So the app probably wouldn't have survived because the technology couldn't support it. But that's my two stories of surprise by not seeing that coming.
Sure. Wow. Well, Northeast's loss was Chicago's gain.
Thanks.
Gina, let's talk about processes.
My favorite.
Me too. Do you now, or did you previously, when you were in the healthcare sector, have standard processes and procedures for identifying risk?
Yeah. So in the healthcare space, it was a pretty well-defined, like, these are the specific steps that we have to take to do this feature, and we have to go through XYZ legal and compliance reviews, yada, yada. So part of that process included sitting down with my engineering leads, my team, walking through the requirements, like making sure that they fully understood like what the business was trying to do, and like just having like a brainstorming session to generate that risk register. And like you could probably tell, like I'm very casual. I like to just like try and remove that fear factor from like talking about risk, because risk is scary to a lot of people when you're like, all right, let's talk about the worst things that could possibly happen with the project, and I'm going to write them down and then talk to all the stakeholders about it. So like just trying to like, get the conversation flowing, write it all down. My engineers would constantly think of like things that would come up that I would not have even known, like just based off of some of their technical discovery with like some of the APIs we worked with. And like, frankly, like that is like pretty agnostic to the industry that you're in. I do this like all the time with my team right now. And like, I also just try and get some diversity from that perspective too. So I'll conduct stakeholder interviews, and while I'm talking to my stakeholders and the customer of the project around like the problem that we're trying to solve, like just understand like what are some of the things that go wrong today, and see if those translate at all into the future state that we're trying to get to. And just like really ask around like, hey, how is this all going to blow up? And then from there, like once I have my risk register, I will go through and start ranking them and coming up with response plans based off of how likely it is. I don't have like unlimited time, so like I won't do that if I have 150 risks to churn through, but I'll like find my top 5 or top 6 and like just really make sure I feel comfortable. And I always communicate that back out to my stakeholders too, because like I feel like that gives them comfort if that like, hey, I've thought about this and here's what I'm planning to do. And sometimes that will even like cause them to pipe up about other things that maybe they didn't catch in the initial round of risk identification. So yeah, like basically just chat with stakeholders, get everybody's input, make sure they feel comfortable, go through, write them down, rate them, continue to communicate. Like I'm all about that communication, and just try and make people feel comfortable, because like projects can be uncomfortable and sucky sometimes. So just try and like get them there. That's my process.
Yeah, definitely. How frequently do you return to that, like brainstorming, or like how often in your process does that happen?
It really depends on like the size and complexity of the project. Like if it's something that I'm just working on with like 3 other people and like I only have 2 stakeholders, like I might just like casually check in over Slack or something like once a week and be like, hey, how's it going? Did this risk like happen? Did anything new come up as you started coding or whatever? If it's something that's like a bigger program that spans across, multiple different areas of the business, I'll probably put together something a little more formal and then host like weekly project check-ins, just to communicate like what's going on. I'm not a huge like fan of status reports, but like I have also put together like IRADs where people can like check in, and I'll tell them like I'll keep it up to date every week, kind of depending on like what your stakeholders want.
Definitely. Not at all related, but now I'm just curious, what don't you like about status reports?
Oh man, I mean, like I think there's value to them. It just depends on like what your stakeholders need and what they want. The thing that I dislike the most about them is that people don't read them. So like if they read them, I would hate them less. But yeah, I always like try and like put my own read receipt at the bottom of them. I put like funny gift or like a joke, and then I'll ask in my meeting if they know the answer. they don't, then I know they didn't read it. So I
Yeah.
don't know. That's my litmus test when I'm dealing with like new stakeholders or team members.
Awesome.
We've done similar things where we will send out the status document and put some Easter eggs in there. And like further down, like if you're reading this line, contact so-and-so for a $25 gift card, right? We do
Yes.
the same thing.
I
We
love
have
that.
the same problem. People don't, for some of our teams, we have live status to just go through like here's what's up for the week.
Mm.
But people aren't paying attention. They're multitasking. And so, it's kind of a fun way it's a fun and approachable way to make the point, right?
I love that idea, Amanda. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Gina. Those become like a drill. Like the boss just needs you to do this. That's all
Right.
there is. And then you go, why do we need to do this? He's not even looking at it. What are we doing with this document? I'm with you.
I would identify that as a risk. Like, I think, because I am a huge proponent of getting things in writing and putting things, like having everything documented, especially with the client relationship. So for me, that's a big risk if my client isn't reading my status reports and isn't like double checking that. Did not need to make this a conversation about status reports, but I just wanted to.
We could probably go all night about
We
that.
honestly, we
could.
probably could. And Erin, I think we should add status reports to our list for
Perfect.
a future meetup. Amanda, let's stick with you. Can you share with us some ways that you and your teams have successfully tracked risk and what you like to do with tracking risk?
Yeah, so it starts with education and comfortability, right? Like, being able to recognize a risk. And it sounds cheesy, but if you see something, say something. For some of our more junior team members, we say like, hey, if something doesn't feel right in your gut, but you're not quite sure what it is, raise your hand, ask for help, bring in your manager, bring in your peers or your partners on the project. And it really kind of starts with identification. Is this a risk? If yes, okay, great. And then what we like to do is we have a shared accountability, so that it doesn't have to just come from the project management team, right? A project manager might not be able to identify a risk that's deep in the code of a specific project type, right? That's where we lean on our teammate partners to say, hey, if you do this, here's what could happen. And then PM can then kind of like run the impact assessment, right? So if this happens, what does it mean? What can we do to mitigate it? We do have a formal risk register. It's not fancy or sophisticated. It's an Excel document. But the information that we try to capture, like the most important information we try to capture is what's the likelihood? Is it high, medium, or low? What is the impact? So again, like in pharma, is there a potential that this could get a letter from the FDA, right? Like how severe is it? And then what's the occurrence time frame? So if you know that based on where you are in your project, that this is something that you can identify that could be a problem a month down the road, identifying that. So you put those factors together, it's a high risk, it is a it's a high risk, it's a high probability in a near time frame, then you probably want to sound the alarm bells right away. But if it's something that's like a medium risk and low probability and 3 months out, you probably just want to we encourage our team to log it anyway, and then just come back to it and make sure that we can get ahead of it if we do. And perhaps, ideally we're able to mitigate it before anything shows up. So for us and our team, we really coach and encourage the first and foremost, the identification of a potential risk, and then having it logged and tracked.
Tell me, not just me, tell us, tell everybody here. Tell us more about like that coaching. And do you mean the PM team specifically, or do you mean your other team partners? I'm really interested in hearing more about that shared accountability and how you encourage your team partners to identify risks and like raise their hands to share them.
Yeah, it's communication. We have trainings, we've done formal trainings on risk and change management within the agency, and it's all a shared accountability because we all have a responsibility for delivery of the best product, right? And so if I'm even as a seasoned digital PM, right? Like I'm not going to be able to pick up immediately on, if our IT partner says they can't do XYZ, what does that mean for my internal dev team? That's where I need to lean on my subject matter expert to tell me and collaborate with me, help me understand what this means. And so from the project management team, we really just encourage the asking of questions. Even if it's just, hey, I'm not sure, is this a risk? What risk might we be incurring? And just kind of like sparking the conversation there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Tony, what is the biggest mistake or wrong assumption you think that people make when they're planning for risk?
So Gina touched on it a little bit earlier. I kind of like that she was mentioning it, is that people are afraid to talk about risk because they're afraid it's going to actually happen. And I think that's the thing that's important to remember, is it's going to happen. Your risk register is going to have something get triggered, and you're going to have to take some kind of response that hopefully you've already kind of written down your response. So talk about it, and talk about it early, I think, is absolutely the most important thing, just to make sure you're communicating with it constantly. I mean, I part of the class that I teach when I go through this, one of the slides we end up showing is the 7 risk responses, or the 7 risk processes from the PMBOK. And it's not a surprise to me that 5 out of 7 of them are in the planning process group. That's no shock. You're supposed to plan for risk. And so the more that you keep that mindset, plan for risk. I mean, it's not hard. Maybe it's a little scary at first, but as long as you prepare for it, it's going to happen. And if you have something to do when it happens, you're better prepared, and you're able to kind of soften that blow. Amanda was talking about communication strategy. Make sure it's documented for sure. It's got to be someplace. I think the challenge with that, well, that's probably kind of a later topic. I'll spin out of control here, but definitely making sure you're talking about it, engaging your clients or your teams, and discussing risk with them.
Definitely. Pretending that it's not going to happen sounds like that's a really big mistake. Assuming it won't. Len, can you tell us about some effective communication strategies? Speaking of communication, either with your team or with clients, some effective communication strategies you've implemented in the past with respect to risk mitigation and management?
I think we created, you have the risk register, but a lot of times what we did is we went one step further and took the critical categories that would really generate risk once the solution was delivered. So we introduced communication with stakeholders and project team members around preparing for risk once the product is delivered. And I'm referencing it, I think, to play a little bit off of what Tony was saying earlier. It was in the healthcare business. And, when you have 250,000 or more deaths related to medical errors, and Tony mentioned billing, 80% of this billing has at least one error in it. So we would take those categories, whether it was pharmacy, surgery, whatever it might be, medication, and those healthcare systems like the Epics, the Cerners, the Allscripts, and so forth. You start to work early on in looking at what can go wrong once that hospital system's implemented, and start to communicate and track around preparation towards that, culminating in a risk assessment and review that actually scores the current status or results of the testing, whether it be a unit test or a user acceptance test, in part of the readiness assessment before you go live. And if there was any chance that any of those tests would indicate that it could cause death, they're immediately shut down. And they don't want to hear it. That's where you end up getting conflict. You've got a regional manager trying to make sure they deliver on time. You've got a project manager or a program manager doesn't want to know that anything went wrong, not on my watch. You've got team members that are worried, like, oh, are they going to blame me? And so now you end up into, if you're not communicating along with that, as well as another area of communication is to go into the organization. Part of risk assessment is doing impact analysis and learning from the folks in the organization that are going to be impacted by the change. What do you do? And how do you think this is going to affect what you do? And they will surface risks that you might not have thought of. So the communication has to, a wider blanket, if you will, cast a wider net to bring in a lot more perspectives. And then we manage that. If you think about the PMBOK, constraints, triple constraints, we have a different set of triple constraints that aligns the risk management, change management, and the quality management. So quality management, your triple constraints, but if you look at the complexity and the degree of change that's required, the environmental factors, that's also where you'll uncover some risks. And on your initial question about assumptions, that's where most risks are going to pop out, because if you don't do a certainty analysis on the assumptions to make sure you're dealing with facts,
Yeah.
they just they'll get you later. Assumptions coming right in to the planning stage that are not vetted are very dangerous.
I could not agree more, Len. Thank you. You said a lot of things that I want to dig into, but there's something specific that I want to dig into for this audience and this crew. And that was specifically project managers and the ownership that we tend to take on for the successful or not so successful delivery of a product or a project or an iteration. So open question for everybody, because this was not on my pre-planned spreadsheet, but what have you done in the past to help yourself or help your team members kind of relieve yourselves of that burden and just know, just talk about that. Anybody?
I'll just say something. You look at all of the project management literature and stuff like that, and they talk about your stakeholders, your sponsors, and the team members. Many times the project manager is not viewed as a stakeholder. The project manager is out there, you organize everybody, you take care of everybody, they're all your stakeholders. Well, the project manager is also a stakeholder. So if you're a product manager, program manager, you need to look at the project manager as a stakeholder and understand what their investment in this is, what their expectations are, and so forth.
So I'll throw out,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, to try to train the rest of your team so they all have those skills in their toolbox too. I think it's great we're able to talk about risk management. We understand it. We know what it is. But a team member who isn't on the same sheet of music may not think of it the same way, may not look at it. So as much training as you can possibly get them. And I'll be honest, when I do the veterans project management class that we teach, I probably learn more from the instructors than the students do sometimes. Sometimes it's great to be a student while you're an instructor. So continual learning, that's what I really look for in employees is, do you have a desire to continue to learn? And that certainly is a trait that I look for when doing hiring.
One of the things that I always, whether as a product manager, or project manager, any sort of like team lead position, like just, it's not my project, it's our project. Like we are all working together to make this thing. Like no one individual can deliver like a piece of software that's going to be used by 15 million people or whatever. Like, I mean, they could, but like for the sake of these projects, they're not.
Yeah.
But yeah, like just constantly like using that language, reiterating that like we all have shared responsibility, and also just kind of like removing that shame or like judgment. If something does go wrong, things always will go wrong. I like, sometimes I overcorrect on this aspect, but like shielding the actual team of people that are doing the work from like why did you not make as many story points this sprint as you did last sprint? Like those kinds of like questions from like unknowing leadership. I always try and shield my team from that so they can actually just get work done, which maybe is where I take on most of the accountability. But in terms of like the project delivery, like that's where I try and just like be transparent around like, what is the thing that we're trying to build? What's the value? and like really make sure we all have a sense of ownership, and it's okay when things don't necessarily always go according to plan. We'll just kind of like iterate off of that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Amanda, go ahead.
Yeah, my one build on that is around the shared responsibility and accountability. That's something that we really try to instill, and then not just within PM, like that's a philosophy at the company that I work with, is shared accountability. And PM is responsible for delivery. That is our subject matter expertise. And so, you know, naturally we tend to feel a strong sense of ownership of everything, right? Because we're steering the ship. And if something goes wrong, we feel like it's our problem to solve, or something that we missed. But again, like setting up that shared accountability at the onset means that everybody knows that they're the subject matter expert for their piece of the project. And it kind of should bring a little bit of a sense of relief, right? Like, I don't need to be an expert on how to code in XYZ platform. That's what my partner is for. What I need to know is how much time do they need? What are the questions that need to be asked in order for them to get enough time that they need? And so, you know, we're not perfect and things go wrong. And, you know, there are things that we do wrong too, right? Like within the PMO, right? We get the timeline wrong, or we forget to vet it with somebody, right? And, you know, what you were saying, Tony, about that sense of self-awareness and what are we going to learn from this, right? And like move on and grow from it. And so, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all for taking that curveball from me. I thought that was a great discussion. Len, you ended your last moment of speaking, talking about assumptions and how if we start a project with assumptions and we don't vet them all and we don't course correct them all, that leads to a lot of risk. So can you share with us your recommended process for outlining those assumptions and moving them from assumptions to fact or fiction?
Sure. It's, you know, there's ways out there to do, you know, a degree of certainty where you can just start to talk through the assumption. One thing I find that's just a quick way to look at those, if the assumption is about we're going to have something happen that's good, then I apply a reverse thing. Well, what could happen that's the worst thing? So if you want to make the best service, let's talk about making the worst service first, see what can go wrong. And, you know, looking at it from that perspective, you start to vet it by looking at, well, what's the relevance of this? You know, who's impacted by it? And what's the importance of this assumption? Does it have strategic importance? Does it have importance to the marketplace? And then the benefits. They're making a lot of assumptions about benefits. For who? And just try to get to the facts, and like you do root cause analysis, just try to go back and back and back. So there's a couple of things I do. A lot of, you know, in quality, there was always the 5 whys. You ask why. Well, I ask why, and then when I get the answer, I say, so what?
Mm.
And then try to get the so what of it before you go to the next why. And in the bigger picture, you look at these assumptions, and if you could break them into 2 groups, assumptions around requirements, those are the things you have to deliver. Those are the conditions you have to meet. That's your checklist. Assumptions around expectations, those are the things that people are saying they expect once this is done. And if you look at it, it's when you're developing a system, the requirements are usually on the functionality. The expectations are around the capabilities for having that functionality. So if you start to dissect them in that way, you can get to the facts around those assumptions and vet them out to how certain you are about, like with risk, the likelihood, the degree of the impact, and you just start to look at them with the same kind of a lens that you apply even to the risk register, the risk analysis.
Awesome. Thank you. This is, I think, Glenn, a topic near and dear to your heart. So I'd love to hear from you, and I'd like to hear from our other folks too, especially if you have examples from your current roles or your previous ones. How do you make sure that you are solving the right problem?
Well, again, it goes back to facts. You know, and looking at, okay, this is a problem. So what? Why is it important? Why do you think it's a problem for you? What's the relevance? What's the degree of the impact? Does the problem fit or into or disrupt your strategy? So just ask exploratory questions before you just say, oh, wow, and you take it on. And just like with risk, you could look at the risk and say, it's an opportunity versus a risk, or you could just do nothing about it as one of the responses to risk. Or you could look at it and say, I have to look at the likelihood of this happening and its impact. So looking at how problems are solved, just, what's your problem statement? And look at that and see, how factual that is. And you have to look at the data. I mean, where did you get the insight from? Do you have the whole picture? I have a brother that's a journalist, and he told me one time, there's not two sides to the story. There's four sides to the story. There's your side, my side, then the two perspectives that haven't been told yet. So we just try to use that exploration, that discovery to uncover the right problem statement as a starting point, and then measure it out to where it's fit, both for the business and for who you're expecting to benefit from it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Anyone else want to jump in on that one? It's okay if you don't.
The only thing I will add is, how do you know you're solving the right problem? You generally find out in about 2 to 3 weeks when you are not solving the right problem. You get a good course correction and you get right back on track.
You bet.
But good points all, Lynn. I jotted a couple.
Thanks.
Yeah, and just to tack on to what Len was saying, I think, like, depending on the environment that you're working within, sometimes you aren't solving the right problem. You know that your project won't. It could be a project that is 5 years long, and by the time you finish it, it's not going to be the right market fit, but you have to, because like the business wants to do it. Like, I've worked in that environment. It drives me insane. I really like working in my current environment where you can be nimble and agile and constantly reassess what that problem is that you're trying to solve and make sure you're sticking to that. But honestly, sometimes you don't. Sometimes your project is solving a completely different problem that's never been written down, that somebody else paid for 6 years ago.
That is true. I'm going to jump in here with, Amanda, go ahead. Did you have something to say?
No, I was just going to say that's more along the lines of how I was thinking about that question, is how you're solving the right problem. Because a lot of times we'll have clients come to us and say, I need this thing. And when what they're really trying to solve, maybe what they're thinking is not the right path. So, right. So our job as an agency and what we do is to, again, get to the root of what are the problem you're trying to solve and why, and then come back to them with maybe a different recommendation on, and ideally better, because that's what they pay us for, right? A different way to solve the problem they think they have. So just a little build on that.
Absolutely.
And I just want to add to what Gina had said. It doesn't stop when you think you have the right problem statement. It is a continuum. You have to be able to revisit it because things change. I got the right problem statement. Let's go fix it. Let's go challenge. Let's take it on. But the world doesn't stop till you're done. So yeah, I think that was a good point, Gina.
I have a couple of audience questions, so I'm going to pivot to those before I wrap up with one of our last questions. So open field, this can go to anybody. Do you have any strategies for encouraging stakeholders who do not see value in planning ahead for risk?
I mean, we have a strategy. I don't know that it works every time.
Perfect.
I mean, the strategy is just communication, right? We get this all the time, right? Len talked about the triad. We're talking about the time, budget, and quality number, right? The time, quality, budget triad. you know, everybody wants it, they want it now. And, you know, they ask like, well, what if you didn't do this? Or what if you don't do that? Or what if you do these two things at the same time? And it's, again, it's, for us, it's that coachable moment to communicate and explain the why. Well, here's what could happen if we do these things in tandem, and here's what it could mean. And if they're okay with that, then okay, we'll go. But it's more about the opportunity to recognize and identify and quantify if possible. We don't always get a chance to do that. And even when we do, we still proceed with the known risks.
I think that comes to change management, because if someone is saying they're not really addressing that, the risk, or just, you know, looking past it, you know, it creates sometimes a little bit of a conflict there, because you know yourself from your experience that that's dangerous. When I encounter someone that has a contrarian view, I'm going to first listen to why they're thinking that way, and then say, you know, that might be an opportunity if you could see something in that again is a reverse think. It's an opposite of what I'm thinking. Is there something in that in itself is valuable we hadn't considered? And if you bring that into the picture. So if they're not wanting to address the risks, they're not that risk averse, you know, find out why and see if there's anything in there. If there isn't a horse in there, then you have to assess the viability of the project and make sure that there's going to be proper communication when things hit the fan.
Hey, Lynn, so you kind of triggered a thought in my head about lessons learned and after action reviews. So if you've got somebody, they don't understand the benefit of risk, they don't want to address it, sometimes it's best to dust off those lessons learned and go, okay, here's what happened last time when we implemented a similar project. Here's what we're going to try to do to avoid that happening this time. And dusting those off and kind of making sure they know, oh, okay, maybe we should address these risks. Maybe we need to look at it. And repetition, if you just kind of, oh, this is something we've implemented 40 times, great, then let's learn from those. What mistakes were made before? Let's not do that. It's hopefully they can learn from the past, or they're willing to learn from the past.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone. All right, here's another audience question. How do you formally, or how formally, that's the question, how formally are you documenting your risks and your risk processes?
I mean, we have a risk register. Everybody, we expect our teams to be using it. And again, it's a shared responsibility between the account and the project management team to keep the risk register up to date, because we know that leadership is going to go through there and they're going to look for it. They're going to look that it's up to date. And on this particular piece of business that I'm on, we're going to look for patterns. What's happening across the entire piece of business that we can start to see and connect the dots and like assess not just the risk on the individual like project level, but what's the portfolio level risk? How much risk are we carrying as an agency when we're doing these type of projects, and what could it mean for our clients as an end result? So we really, we kind of stress it again, if best, you know, use your best judgment, right? If the risk is that you think you're going to have a typo, that probably doesn't belong in the risk register. But if the risk is that you think you're going to miss a deadline, or you're going to have a code branch error or whatever, right? Get that documented. It's also kind of a CYA, right? Like, I called this out, we called this out, we identified it, we documented it. Here's what we discussed about it. And then should it come to fruition, it's like, okay, well, we talked about it. We knew this could be a thing. So that's how we encourage our teams to keep on top of it. It's not easy, but.
Thanks, Amanda.
Hey, Amanda, I like that you mentioned your leadership is looking at it. That's definitely, so that tells me that they have a clear way of finding it and being able to navigate whatever SharePoint, Confluence,
Yep.
whatever software you're using to be able to get to it. It's definitely important. Obviously, your leadership's going to want to know it. Does the rest of your team know how to access it? Do other teams adjacent left and right to you, can they get to it? Do they have to go 40 clicks in before they find it? I know that trying to find something easy is key. That's critical to be able to get it in a whim.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I would say at like the more senior level where you have like a more program manager, yes, I know where all of the risk registers are. But at the day-to-day project manager level, I wouldn't expect them to know where they are, but you bring up a fantastic point, because as we try to encourage our teams to go out of their team silo and ask what's going on across the portfolio, knowing where all of those are is a really good idea.
Yeah, we've used a risk register, but we supplement it depending on the scope of the project, especially if it's in healthcare, and you're putting in hospital systems or something like that. And there was a big digital transformation project, so we have the risk registers, front and center, but we also link it to the impact analysis, and we also link it to a gap analysis. So, how are you going to close some of these gaps? What's the risk if they're not closed? What's the impact from a change management standpoint on certain people in the organization, and what are the risks associated with that? You bring those into the risk register in conjunction with the project's risks, and then definitely rolling it up, looking to the left and the right, because there's some other project, you have to know what's going on. It's all connected, so you have to know what's going on, and your risk becomes an issue. It can become an issue for another project also.
Yeah, and I follow a similar process as Amanda, like documenting it in a per project risk register. I think it's really cool that your leadership is bought into that and they look at it. But I think like if your organization isn't mature enough where that's a thing, at least documenting it for yourself and your immediate team to be like, hey, we've thought about this, and then like people can kind of get excited about it once they realize that's a thing that exists and has value. I've seen good adoption through that.
Awesome. Thank you all. Well, we, believe it or not, have been chatting for an hour already. I felt like this was a great conversation. So I'm going to wrap it up with one more question, and it's half audience question, half my own. So the audience question is, what is the best piece of advice you have received in relation to risk management? And then my question was, what piece of advice do you want to make sure everyone here leaves with? They can be the same or they can be different. Amanda, let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not a sexy answer, but the answer is just communicate about it. Ask questions. If you're not sure, ask the question. Somebody around you probably knows. So raising your hand if you're not sure, sometimes just asking the question, is this a risk, or what risk might we incur? If you ask that in front of your group, your team of delivery experts, that might make somebody think, well, oh yeah, now that you asked the question, it might mean X, Y, Z. So it's not a fancy answer, but that's the answer I've got.
That's great. Tony.
Yeah, Amanda, I don't think mine's very fancy either. It's just practice it, do it. That if you're not doing some sort of risk response or making a risk register, then you're not planning for success. You're just kind of maintaining and just moving on. So I think just actually doing it. If there's anything I learned from my Army experience, is training and practicing and repetition just makes you that much better at it. I can apply that same principle here to risk. Absolutely.
Thanks, Tony. Len, how about you?
I think I was told, which I think makes something I've carried, is, it's just common sense. And applying common sense, and don't be afraid to get into the details, because that's, where things are going to go wrong. My advice would be, how we've addressed that is, the more diverse you can have your thinking through inclusion. I would say diverse thinking through inclusion will give a lot of other perspectives that could uncover a lot of more risks, or ways to solve the problem, ways to avoid the risk or see opportunity in the risk. So I would say for me, my one piece of advice would be diverse thinking through inclusion.
Wonderful. Gina.
All right, I'm gonna end it on an unoriginal thought. Yeah, to blend all of 3 of your answers together, I would say, like, always be thinking about risk, like, be that paranoid project or program manager, assume things are going to go wrong, but like, make it approachable in how you're thinking about it. Like, that was one of the things that I learned early on in my career. And then I completely agree with Len, like, just always be getting diverse ideas and diverse input on what's going to blow up on your project, because it probably will. Think about all the people that your project is going to metaphorically touch and talk to them. And there's probably, like, some accountant in a back room somewhere that is involved somehow in your project that you haven't thought about, and just, like, go talk to them. They probably have a problem.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for this really well-rounded and I think very diverse conversation. Aaron, I am going to kick it over to you, my friend.
All righty. Well, hey everyone. Thank you again for our speakers. Thank you for our audience for coming in, joining us for this February discussion. If you're watching online, then I hope you enjoyed it as well. As I mentioned earlier, we will be having more of these. Some of them will be discussions. Some of them will be kind of deeper dives into specific topics. We're planning what our March one is at the moment, looking for speakers. Also keep an eye out. We are going to be doing what we're conceptualizing right now as a Digital Tools Expo, where we'll be sending out a call for interest. If you have a digital tool that you use and you want to take 5-6 minutes to kind of get on a Zoom and share it with other people, that's kind of what we're thinking might come up later in the year, which I think will be really exciting. Beyond that, if you know any speakers who you think would be good for this, or if you think you'd be a good speaker for this, or even if you want to talk to us and you have topics you're interested in learning about that you want us to find speakers, reach out, let us know. We're always happy to talk. And with that, I think we'll call it a night, and we'll see everyone in March.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Lynn,
Bye.
appreciate you getting me in this. I appreciate
Oh,
it.
Thanks,
next time it's
everybody.
good to see you again.
Yeah, you too.